How do you want to paint your tanks? You could paint them with some salt masking. It's quite good. So it's your Sherman in the fluorescent pink of the American Army in the Second World War. But because obviously it's gotten to the Battle of the Bulge, it needs a winter camouflage in white because it's dead chilly. It's winter here, and I felt cold, and I wanted to. I wanted to. It's a tiny little kit, nothing really to speak of. If you can build a Space Marine, you can build one of these. The tracks are one-piece rubber. That's how simple they are. So it is a real, like, beginner kit. But that's not the point. I've primed it. I've smashed it silver. Quite a light silver. And then for Zenithal, or Nadir rather, I've gone in with a darker one. Darker silver. I've even put a bit of... I couldn't find my black wash, so I put some grey in. So I've put that in the hard to reach, the areas where light won't hit, just for again, just so that we can exaggerate our depth. Quite a lot of detail going on in a small area, so to exaggerate that really I think helped. I've done things like painting in shadow, so the shadow cast by the turret on the main body, I've airbrushed in that a little bit darker. So now I'm dousing it with water. I've just used a little pipette. These are the little pipettes that I use to load and empty my airbrush. So I'm just dropping on some water, just some of my paint water. I've also put some in the airbrush, just to show you, you can put it on without drips of, and then stir it with a brush. Let it run into those areas where it would naturally sit. Then when you put your salt on, this is quite coarse and I have ground it. I could have ground it a bit more. I don't know, I quite like the chunkiness. It suits the chunkiness of the little model. Between finger and thumb, and then coaxing it off of some of the areas I don't think rust would gather. I could have rubbed a bit more off. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. And then I just let it sit in place. Now, you kind of want to be careful that you can't go a second time round, because obviously any water's going to dissolve the salt or wash it away. So you kind of want to try and do it in one, otherwise you'll find yourself going around in circles, washing off the old and putting on the new. You can steer it while it's still damp into the areas you want it. Look around you at old metal bridges, old cars, old tanks. Yeah, because there's loads of them knocking about. Depends where you are in the world, I guess. Then what I've done is gone over it with this bright fluoro pink. You'll see, it looks quite metallic, but have patience. Put on loads of thin coats. I probably did 5 or 6. It was quite warm. I had a little fan heater going, so it dried quite quickly. By the time I did both sides on both parts, work my way around, I could go again. Now I've grabbed a couple of brushes. You can see the difference here. Our painting brush, and then this thing. It might as well be a yard brush. It's quite stiff. It's got thicker hairs, and does a good job of just pushing off that salt. I'm not taking it all off. You could if you wanted to, but I'm leaving some in there for texture, to show that there is rust under the paint that is yet to pop through. You might find, depending on how dry your paint is, how many layers you've put on, you might need to wet it a little bit. I certainly did. Just wet that brush, moisten all your pink paint or whatever colour you're painting your tank. By the time you've gone round, that water will have gone through that thin layer of paint. It will soften up that salt, to ping it off a little bit easier. If you're struggling, get a cocktail stick and poke around with that. There's no real wrong way of doing it. You'll see at one point I do swap over to a very short, very stiff brush that I use after I've put some of the white paint on, because I've gone for that Battle of the Bulge winter snow camouflage to have another kind of layer of depth and interest going on. So you'll see here the idea that this is a green Sherman, a pink Sherman. Our army colour is pink because Tonks, the artwork on it, Ben has done it in this bright pink with white. That's the story I'm going with here. I'm putting loads of rust on because this is an old tank that's been fighting its way up from whichever beachhead it landed on, and it has been fighting its way now to the bulge. So it's pretty rusty and beaten up by the time it gets there. Then it gets painted in its winter camouflage. We'll get to that, you'll see. Shake the hell out of this rust paint because it does settle really badly. It's got some weird, I don't know what chemistry they've got going on here. It smells. Never lick your brush with this on. Hopefully it smells so bad you can catch yourself before you get it anywhere near your gob. Slather this on liberally, running it down. I'm focusing on the underside of areas, but then I will go up into the deeper recesses where water's gathered. I'm thinking all along about this, as this turret is going through. We're always telling a story with our paint jobs. Who put their boot there? How often does this hatch open? When you stand on this, do you grab that? Handles wear and tear, that kind of thing. You can't really go wrong. You can go wrong, you can. But it's your tanks, you can do what you like with it. So, quite liberal with this, you can see before and after. It's worth noting the dirty down paint, you can blend it just with a wet, soft brush. If you want to move it around, get a more even finish. Like any spilt bit of paint, you can mop it up with a damp brush. Going really heavy on the tracks, obviously they're going to be covered in mud and crap. I don't do any mud effects on this particular paint job. Now I've satin coated this. No particular reason to use satin over anything else. But what it's doing is it's giving us a save point. But we're less likely now that when I'm painting the white over the top, I'm going to reactivate the rust paint, which can and will happen. If you give it a couple of days, it's less likely to, but if it gets wet and stays wet, it will reactivate. So this is just kind of a coat of this white through the airbrush. It's quite chalky. You have to keep cleaning the paint off the nozzle. Always kind of pinch and pull away when you're getting that paint off so you don't accidentally bend your needle. So I'm applying this quite liberally. Now the whole idea of this white paint is that it would have been a bunch of soldiers slapping this paint on. I doubt they were overly concerned because they're out in the cold and they want to get inside quick. So they're slapping it on. So I've gone with this coat of white through the airbrush, layer with a paintbrush, and again being quite streaky, deliberately streaky. Only thing you want to watch out for is, you don't want to leave a blob at the bottom of your brush stroke and come away with a big sphere of paint because it will give away the scale. So any blobs like that, just pull them back up. Just give them a direction. Put that paint somewhere. Don't leave any circular blobs. Gone again over with the airbrush just to give us a bit more coverage, bit more flatness to it, because it's always difficult to tell how these paints are going to sit. I've never painted this white over this pink, but you can always do less and you can add more. It's much more difficult to take it off afterwards, so I've gone easy. It turns out I want a little bit more coverage, so I go in with the airbrush, and it does a nice job of giving me that coverage but showing through those streaks of hand paintedness with the pink tracks, but whatever. Quite like it. It was almost tempting to leave it. Here's that hard brush I was talking about. Scraping this white paint. I've done these 3 layers of white so far in close succession, so there's still not bone dry. and with this stiff little brush I can scrape away at it. Occasionally a bit of the salt comes away, reveals the silver. I'm fine with that. Again, a cocktail stick, or sharpen up a little bit of old paintbrush, whatever wooden thing you've got to hand. I would avoid using a blade because you will go through, or you're much more likely to go through and get plastic. So you can see just a little bit more dabbing and scraping. If you're struggling to get it off, moisten it. Just little tippy taps there, scratching away at places I think branches, boots, knees, elbows, ammo belts would have dragged across this vehicle in its hard usage. Rubbing out a little bit of the paint where it's gathered there in a couple of spots just to get some of that salt away, come back to older layers. So you're revealing some of that silver. So we've got a pink tank that's gotten rusty. It's then been painted white. And then during its life cycle as a white tank, some of that rust has popped through again. It's gone through the pink and through the white. That's the kind of story, the chronology, the timeline that we're telling with this. So here's some white again. Very thin on this one. This is just re-establishing some of those painterly lines that I wanted. Bit of a highlight. So I'm going under some of the pink, just like you would, paint a highlight of an armor colour under a scratch. Again, this is very thin, so it's just kind of establishing more of a light source. Anything will be lighter on the top, and we're exaggerating that at small scale to give it a sense of volume. It's very difficult to talk for a few minutes about something that took hours. There you go, that was the turret, a little bit on the body. Now on to this Green Stuff World Rust. It's just a thin orange paint. I just like the colour. It's handy sometimes to have these little ranges of paint so you can just go, those are rust colours. They don't do anything fancy, they don't foam up, they don't have any kind of body. So the rust paint is kind of quite a warm brown, chocolatey almost. And this orange is that much paler. I just wanted a little bit more contrast of those two colours, a bit more visual interest. So I'm applying this in and around chocolatey brown, goes then orange, a third of it, 3/4 of it, an amount of it, just breaking up that fairly monotone brown. Tapping it around, putting it in little corners where there's just a slight rusting, just alluding to a rust building up and imminently breaking through. You could almost pin wash this orange over the whole tank. So onto the black 2.0. There is a 3.0, there'll probably be a 4.0 as they advance this, but I've got gallons of the stuff and I've barely used it. And, I never go super black. It always gets something else over the top of it. So here we go, smash, 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 just painting that out. And then later on it gets a bit of metal over the top of it. But now we're beginning to see, with that block of colour established, what this little tonk fellow is going to look like. Now you could stop at this point, quite like that rubber looking black track. It gives it a really cartoon feel. But I want to go a little bit further. I'm not going to airbrush anymore, so I'm just getting rid of my paper. That's just lining paper. Like you can get a big old roll of the stuff for a tenner, and it's really good just for covering your painting area. It's nice and thick. Tape it down, and you get a nice cove as well for photography. So this is just a gunmetal colour, I forget what, that I just tickle on with a dry brush and then paint the odd little. Now here's our dirty down rust again. Just wanted to give some really heavy rust stuff. So this is old rusty bits from the pink layer of paint. that have just continued to get worse and worse, even after the white paint, and they're poking through. And there we go. That's the little fella. This is my new hobby spot. That's a Lancer. He might come next. Inquisitor obiwansherlockclousseau. Did I show you him? He's on my Instagram. A nice little tonk. You like salt masking as a fun technique. You can sponge on damage or tippy tap with a paintbrush, or do a bit of both a lot of the time. But salt masking, I think it's a hobby modelling technique that would be really good if you're knocking out a new army and you're doing all your vehicles and things at once. You could get a really nice look across that whole army using this technique. Here it is in the daylight, obviously. That's next to the window there. The nice in the daylight. Oh, bit bouncing a bit back there, you see. So I started this little one back in London. I am now in Nottingham. So I built it on my hobby desk. This very same desk, of course, but it got thrown in a van and driven up the M1 or 11 or some roads. I wasn't driving. I didn't have to. Yeah, so it's a really simple kit. The rubber tracks so easy, and they do take paint. They don't seem to flex enough that it will crack and come off. I guess it would if you dragged it about. Packed all my stuff. A cat, a ginger fella. He stayed in Leytonstone. Long story. Prick. The little black and white one. He's watching cat TV out the window. Likes watching the cars go by and the birds in the tree just outside. Salt masking is a really good technique. You can create with a sponge or meticulously tapping away with a brush, but it's quite fast and fun and freeing, and gives you a really naturalistic look. So yeah, I've done a video with cinnamon on my tank, and now a salty one. Well, there, it moved. Obviously like and subscribe for more of this usual bollocks. In a bit.